Usually when we talk about paying off a debt, the whole process it's incredibly straightforward.
Oh, yeah. Like a mortgage.
Right. You get a statement in the mail, you look at the number, you write a check, and the balance goes down. It's just, simple math.
Exactly. It's measurable, it's finite, and there's a clear finish line where you are finally free and clear.
But then you look at a completely different kind of ledger. You look at the debt we owe our parents. I mean, the literal blood, sweat, unfulfilled dreams, and massive sacrifices they made so we could just exist, let alone have a shot at a better life.
Yeah, that's where the math breaks down completely.
Completely.
Yeah.
Suddenly, we're looking at this emotional and spiritual mortgage that is honestly overwhelming. I mean, how many of us, maybe you're sitting in your car right now, well into your 40s or 50s, and you're walking around feeling this heavy, invisible weight.
A lot of people, I think.
Yeah, you feel totally lost, wondering what your true purpose is and how on earth you can genuinely repay the massive investment your parents made in you.
It really is the ultimate existential dilemma for so many adults today. We have all these opportunities, yet we carry this underlying guilt that we aren't doing enough to validate what it took to get us here.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive is going to be so profoundly relevant to you. We're pulling from a fascinating lecture transcript today that takes all of our traditional default ideas about filial piety, spirituality, and religion and just, well, it flips them completely on their head.
And what's fascinating here is how the material doesn't just offer feel-good platitudes. It actually demands that we look at the underlying logic, like the actual mechanisms of what we're doing when we try to honor our parents or when we search for spiritual guidance.
Right. So the mission for our deep dive today is to extract the practical wisdom from these notes. We want to understand how living a brilliantly shining, respected life is actually the ultimate form of honoring your parents.
And how true spirituality is entirely about learning and growing, not just, blindly begging the universe for blessings.
Yep. Exactly. Let's unpack this because we need to start with where this immense, crushing pressure to repay our parents actually comes from historically.
Well, to understand the weight of that sacrifice, the source argues we have to look back at what it calls the evolutionary period of human history.
Okay.
This was a time when human existence was primarily focused on sheer survival and basic reproduction. I mean, raising children required immense, almost unfathomable physical sacrifice.
Right.
To the point where it consumed a person's entire existence, especially for women.
Yeah, and one detail in our research really stood out to me on that point. Think about the sheer physical toll of child rearing in the past. It was so brutal that wealthy families or royals, they didn't even raise their kids directly.
Oh, right, the wet nurses.
Yeah, they brought in wet nurses. If a woman had the financial means or the societal status, she was deliberately separated from the raw physical labor of rearing the child. She might manage the estate, but the grueling work was outsourced.
So that experts could focus on giving the child an intellectual education, yeah.
It really highlights how all-consuming basic survival used to be for the average everyday person.
Right, because for the vast majority of history, society didn't give women, or most people really, the opportunity to build their own intellectual knowledge or pursue personal development. Their singular mandate from society was to ensure the next generation simply survived the winter.
Wow. But then we hit this massive pivot when we look at modern parents, like the mothers and fathers of adults today. Our notes describe this generation of parents as having a very high mass, meaning they have a high capacity, high intelligence, and massive potential.
Right, but they took all of their own unfulfilled dreams, all of that intellectual capacity, and they sacrificed it specifically so their children could achieve what they couldn't.
They didn't just sacrifice for physical survival anymore.
No, exactly. They sacrificed for your societal success. They poured their high-level energy and resources into your education and your potential.
Which brings up a really uncomfortable thought for a lot of us. If we just sit around in our 50s, failing to shine, feeling aimless, and doing nothing with our lives,
It's a problem.
it's like our parents made this massive, high-stakes investment in a startup company, meaning us, and we just let the stock crash to zero.
Yeah, that startup analogy is perfect.
It's a total sunk cost.
Yeah.
The text actually uses a specific concept here, that all those efforts become completely in vain.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this completely redefines the concept of filial piety, the virtue of respect for one's parents. Traditionally, we might think honoring our parents is about dutifully visiting them on holidays, bringing them an expensive fruit basket, or just being polite.
Wait, hold on. Are we saying that visiting your parents and taking care of them isn't actually honoring them? Because that sounds like the literal definition of being a good kid.
Well, the text isn't saying that being kind to your parents is wrong, but it argues it's fundamentally insufficient if you want to truly repay their life's investment. True filial piety is becoming a person who is respected and valued by society.
Okay, I see.
Think about the energetic mechanism here. When a child goes out into the world and shines, when they do meaningful work, when they help others, when they earn the genuine respect of their peers, the parents' lifelong sacrifices are instantly validated.
Okay, but I'm trying to wrap my head around a really specific claim made in our source material. It argues that when a child lives this incredibly respected, shining life, the parents will, quote, never get sick.
Right.
Now, my immediate reaction is, wait, if my mom gets ill, is it my fault because I'm not successful enough? That feels incredibly harsh. How did the logic of that actually work?
I know it sounds harsh until you look at the psychological and biological mechanisms of chronic worry.
Oh.
What happens when a parent watches their 40 or 50-year-old child floundering, unhappy, and lost?
And to worry constantly.
Right. The parent absorbs that anxiety. They carry a heavy, unresolved emotional burden because their life's project, which is you, is struggling.
Wow. Okay.
That chronic anxiety spikes cortisol, suppresses the immune system, and manifests physically as illness and rapid aging.
Ah, okay. So it's not magic. It's the physical manifestation of carrying someone else's heavy energy.
Precisely. But reverse it. When parents see that their sacrifice actually produced a leader, someone who is thriving and contributing to the world, they experience a profound psychological release.
The heavy burden of their unfulfilled dreams lifts.
Exactly. They're literally energized by their child's success. According to the source, that deep spiritual peace strengthens their vitality.
That makes profound sense. So if our ultimate goal, our literal duty, is to live this shining, enlightened life, to honor our parents' investment, the natural question is, where do we go to figure out how to do that?
Right, because they don't teach how to be a respected leader in standard high schools.
Exactly. Historically, when we want to live a better, more enlightened life, we look for spiritual guidance. We go to temples, to churches, to ashrams.
We do, but there's a fascinating argument here that we have been using these spiritual spaces completely incorrectly for centuries.
Here's where it gets really interesting. According to the logic we're exploring today, a temple or a spiritual center is not supposed to be a wishing well.
No, not at all.
It's not a place where you drop in a coin, blindly bow, and ask a higher power to fix your marriage or make you rich. It was originally designed to be a school and a training ground.
Think about the physical locations of ancient temples. They are usually built on pristine, beautiful mountainsides, surrounded by nature,
Yeah,
right?
they're gorgeous.
The architecture, the location, the tranquility, these were all meticulously designed to create the optimal environment for intense study and deep reflection. They were never meant to be transactional spaces for begging.
There is this incredibly modern, specific example in our research that perfectly illustrates this. It suggests that instead of just walking into a temple and immediately dropping to your knees, a truly wise, modern person might go to that beautiful, highly energized mountain environment, pop in their Bluetooth earbuds so they don't bother anyone else, and just sit quietly.
Right.
They meditate while listening to a profound lecture or an educational talk.
I love that image. The juxtaposition of ancient temple grounds and Bluetooth earbuds, it completely demystifies the whole spiritual practice.
It really does.
You are using the pure energy of the environment to absorb intellectual knowledge. You're there to study the laws of human nature, to figure out how to solve the contradictions in your own life, not to ask an invisible deity for a favor.
But let me push back on this a little bit because the material specifically critiques the physical act of bowing. And I just thought, why shouldn't we bow? Isn't bowing just a universal sign of respect?
Sure.
What's the harm in showing a little humility to the universe?
Well, to answer that, the source says we have to look at the fundamental psychology of prostration. Bowing is, at its core, a physical act of submission.
Okay.
It is a manifestation of saying, I did wrong, I'm lesser, I'm lowering myself before you. Now, if you've committed a crime, or if you're genuinely apologizing to your parents for a specific wrongdoing, bowing is entirely appropriate. It deflects anger and shows remorse.
Sure. If you mess up, you apologize.
Right. But if you are an educated, modern adult, someone who is supposed to be a leader in society, why are you constantly falling to your knees? You can and should show respect. You can nod to the monks, you can appreciate the environment, but constantly prostrating yourself fundamentally alters your brain's neurological loop. It strips you of your agency.
Because if my body is constantly subservient, my mind becomes subservient.
Exactly. It conditions you to be a blind follower. You stop looking for practical solutions to your problems, and instead you start waiting for a magical rescue. You stay in a state of learned helplessness.
Which creates a massive systemic problem.
Right.
Because people stopped going to temples to learn and take agency, and instead just showed up to blindly beg for help. And it changed the very nature of these religious institutions. I mean, it's basic supply and demand.
Yeah, if thousands of people show up offering donations in exchange for having their problems magically solved, the institution has no choice but to adapt to manage that massive influx of capital.
And the result is that temples and churches grew into massive, wealthy corporations. They had to start managing real estate and financial portfolios.
Exactly.
The monks and priests, who were originally supposed to be spiritual teachers and scholars, basically morphed into middle managers and security guards for the congregation's wealth.
And this commercialization reaches its absolute, most illogical peak in how we handle the afterlife. Specifically, how we deal with the souls of our ancestors.
Yes. This brings us to the practice of paying for ancestral rituals. The popular idea is that an ancestor's soul is wandering, they're stuck, and they are causing bad luck for the living family.
Right.
So the family pays a temple a large sum of money, a monk does a chant, rings a bell, and boom, the ancestor gets a VIP ticket to heaven.
That is the widely accepted transactional approach to salvation, yes.
But I'm looking at this and thinking, wait, if a soul is wandering because it's full of heavy, dark attachments, regrets, and anger about its past life, how does simply paying someone money to chant suddenly pop up on the gates of heaven?
It doesn't.
That makes zero logical sense.
Yeah.
If I'm furious and deeply attached to my earthly house, hearing a bell ring because my grandson paid $1,000 doesn't magically enlighten me.
You've hit the exact absurdity that this philosophy points out. It essentially asks, do you really believe the universe operates on a pay-to-play system?
Right.
We have to look at the physics of spiritual weight, what makes an energy heavy. Ignorance, attachment, and unresolved anger.
Okay.
If a soul is heavy with that energy, it physically cannot rise. It does not matter if you pay for the ritual once or 100 times. The soul might get excited because they hear heaven's doors are opening, but when they reach the threshold, their own heavy energy pulls them back down. They just end up wandering again.
So if throwing money at a ritual doesn't work, how do you actually help a wandering heavy soul? What's the mechanism for making a soul lighter?
Well, this is where the text defines true salvation as opposed to blind rituals. Souls wander because they're ignorant of the broader truth. They don't know why they are stuck. True salvation means literally holding an educational intervention for the souls.
An intervention for a ghost. I love that. How does that actually work?
The descendants create the space, they set the intention, and a true teacher explains the mechanics of reality to the spirits. They teach them that holding onto their earthly grudges is actually causing their descendants physical and emotional pain.
Oh, wow.
They explain that the physical life is over and it's time to move forward.
So it's an educational process, not a magical one. And if we think about the mechanics of that, think about a time you were terribly confused and anxious about a massive problem in your life. It feels like a literal physical weight on your chest, right?
Absolutely.
But then someone sits you down and clearly explains the solution. What happens? You physically sigh, your shoulders drop, you literally feel lighter.
That is the exact physics of consciousness. When you alleviate ignorance through truth, the energy becomes lighter. Now apply that to a soul without a physical body. That lightness allows them to rise.
That's incredible.
But this raises an important question, perhaps the most important one. If this educational intervention works for the dead, what about the living?
Yes, because there are plenty of living people walking around with incredibly heavy, dark, confused energy.
Exactly. And the mechanism is identical. True salvation for sentient beings, for living humans, is about teaching them how to stop wandering blindly through their lives. It's about teaching them the natural laws of how the world works so they can live correctly.
Right.
Whether you are dealing with a wandering spirit or a deeply confused 50-year-old human, the solution is never magic or money. The solution is always education and uncovering the truth.
And there is a massive warning here for anyone listening. If you keep paying for empty transactional rituals, You are just wasting your life. You run around from temple to temple, from psychic to shaman, outsourcing your problems.
Yep.
You failed to do the actual rigorous spiritual work of studying and understanding your own life, and you just remain trapped in a cycle of dependency.
You remain ignorant, the religious institution remains wealthy, and absolutely no spiritual evolution occurs for anyone involved.
This profound misunderstanding of what salvation actually is completely redefines the difference between having blind faith and practicing true religion. Because, let's be honest, in modern conversation, we tend to use the words faith and religion interchangeably.
We do, but conceptually they are miles apart. If we look at the root meanings provided in the text, foundational faith is basically an emergency room.
Let's expand on that ER analogy because that is just so helpful.
Foundational faith is for when people are weak, struggling, and genuinely need a higher power just to survive the week. If you get into a terrible car crash, you go to the ER. You don't ask the ER doctor to teach you the intricate anatomy of your femur. You just want them to give you painkillers and stop the bleeding.
Right, fix the immediate problem.
Exactly. In impoverished, highly difficult times, blind faith is necessary. You go, you bow, you ask for comfort and immediate relief.
But the problem is when we treat the ER like it's our primary residence.
Precisely. Once society has developed, once people are highly educated and no longer worrying about basic survival, staying in the blind faith phase is incredibly regressive. That is when you must transition to true religion. And true religion is not the ER, it's physical therapy.
Okay, I see where this is going.
In physical therapy, the goal isn't just to mask the pain. The goal is to teach you how your muscles work. You have to do the hard, sweaty work of building strength so that you can walk on your own 2 feet and never have to go back to the ER again.
Oh, that's such a good way to frame it.
The literal translation of the characters for religion in many Eastern philosophies means to teach the highest truth. It is not about bowing to a deity. It's an educational system meant to move you past the stage of begging for help and into a stage of intellectual mastery.
But religious institutions have largely failed to make this transition. They're still treating highly educated, capable modern adults like helpless survivors from the evolutionary period, telling them to just keep taking the painkillers, just keep bowing, just keep praying.
And that systemic failure is exactly what is preventing people from realizing their true ultimate purpose. Which brings us to the concept of the reincarnated leader, often referred to in these philosophies as a homjik ingen, a human whose purpose is to broadly benefit humanity.
So what does this all mean for you? We touched on this earlier, but we need to dive into this idea of who we actually are. The material frames our modern existence in a way that is just mind-blowing. It states that highly educated people today are actually reincarnated leaders and royals from past lives.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture of historical karma, the text suggests that in your past lives, your soul was in a position of immense power. You were a king, a queen, a general, or a high-ranking official.
Oh, yeah.
And in those roles, because human history was brutal and ignorant, you created a lot of heavy karma. You made decisions that started wars, caused mass suffering, or mismanaged society's resources.
Okay, this completely shifts the perspective. We aren't just random people trying to find a comfortable job and pay a mortgage. We are souls carrying the massive karmic debt of our past mistakes in leadership. We literally created the messy, chaotic environment of the world we see today, and now we've been sent back, given immense educational resources, to clean up our own mess.
That is the core argument. As a reincarnated leader, a homjik ingen, your purpose is not to just buy a nice house, hide from the world, and perform a few rituals on the weekend to feel spiritual. Your purpose is to use your high-level education, your modern resources, and your intellect to solve the contradictions in society.
But how do we actually clear that massive historical karma? Because I'll be honest, knowing I might have started a war 3 centuries ago is a lot of pressure to carry.
It is a profound amount of pressure, but it also provides ultimate, crystal-clear clarity. The mechanism for clearing karma is explicitly clear. You absolutely cannot brain off your karma just by praying. You cannot bow enough times to erase the systemic mistakes of your past lives.
And as we established, you definitely can't buy a paid ancestral ritual to VIP your way out of it.
No, you can't. Karma isn't a cosmic tally sheet of bad deeds. It's stagnant, unresolved energy. The only way to incinerate that stagnant energy is through the kinetic energy of selfless action. You have to burn your life's time, your passion, and your intellect as fuel to benefit others.
Wow.
When you dedicate this lifetime to helping society, your soul becomes incredibly light. All those heavy, dark attachments of your past are literally burned away by the heat of your service to humanity.
And when your soul becomes completely light, you achieve liberation. You graduate.
Yeah.
You never need to return to a heavy physical human body again because you finally completed your mission.
Exactly.
But if you fail to benefit others, if you just hoard your wealth and hide, your karma remains completely unchanged, no matter how much money you donate to a temple.
So to synthesize this entire journey, if you are sitting in your 50s feeling a profound sense of aimlessness, it's not because you haven't found the right hobby. It's because your soul intrinsically knows it has a massive mission to benefit humanity, and you're trapped in an old paradigm that tells you just go to a building and pray about it.
Right. True filial piety isn't just about familial duty. It's about taking the unimaginable sacrifices your parents made and using that energy to live a brilliantly shining life that genuinely helps society. When you do that, your parents' sacrifices are validated and their own heavy burdens are lifted.
And to achieve that shining life, you have to stop viewing spiritual spaces as transactional ERs where you beg for painkillers. You must use them as physical therapy, as schools to uncover the highest truths, to reflect and to study the mechanics of reality.
Exactly.
Your past karma, the immense debt of your past actions, can only be cleared by how much you actively help lift others out of their ignorance today.
Which brings us right back to that overwhelming emotional mortgage we talked about at the very beginning. The debt to our parents, the debt to our past lives.
Yeah.
We can't pay it off with a check, and we certainly can't pay it off by paying someone to ring a bell and chant for us. It requires our actual lived kinetic energy.
It really does.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. If burning off our past karma genuinely requires us to practically benefit humanity by alleviating ignorance, what if the simple act of sitting down with a struggling friend, sharing a newly learned truth over a cup of coffee, and helping them see their life more clearly?
That's a great point.
Right. What if that simple conversation is actually a vastly more powerful spiritual ritual than any expensive, elaborate ceremony money could ever buy?